Here's something nobody wants to admit. The Pulitzer Prize, America's most prestigious literary award, has given its top honor to books that glorify the Confederacy, to novels critics now call white savior narratives, and to a work so polarizing that the jury nearly resigned in protest. And yet, sitting on that same list is what might be the greatest American novel ever written, a book about cowboys that most people have never read. So what does that tell us? Everything. The Pulitzer Prize for fiction has been awarded since 1948, though the broader Pulitzer for letters goes all the way back to 1918. Every year, a rotating committee reads hundreds of submitted novels and picks what they believe is the pinnacle of American literary achievement. That's the official story. The reality is messier, more human, and honestly a lot more interesting. Because when you read through the entire list, you're not just reading great novels, you're reading the story of America itself. Every decade, the books that win reflect what the country was afraid of, what it was proud of, what it was desperately trying to work through. The list is a mirror, and sometimes America doesn't love what it sees. Think about what it means that Gone with the Wind won in 1936, a sweeping romantic epic written from the perspective of someone who genuinely mourned the Confederacy. A nation still crawling out of the Depression handed that story its highest literary prize. That tells you something. But here's what makes the list genuinely fascinating. It doesn't just capture America's values at any given moment. It captures their evolution. 20 years after Gone with the Wind, Harper Lee wrote To Kill a Mockingbird. That book has real problems, the white savior framing, justice ultimately denied, and Atticus Finch who became a symbol for a kind of well-intentioned moral failure that still haunts American liberalism. But it also cracked open a conversation millions of people weren't having. The needle moved, even imperfectly. Then jump to 1988 and Toni Morrison's Beloved. If Mockingbird views racism through a screen door, Beloved kicks the door completely off its hinges. Morrison shows you the psychological, physical, and spiritual devastation of slavery, not through metaphor, but through unflinching, precise, gorgeous prose. She shifts perspective mid-sentence. She makes the supernatural feel more real than reality. Every single word does exactly the work it needs to do. It is the most technically flawless novel I have ever read. Full stop. What's remarkable is the arc. From Gone with the Wind's lost cause nostalgia to Morrison's excavation of slavery's horror, that's 50 years of American literature grappling with the same wound. Then Colson Whitehead wins twice in 3 years. The Underground Railroad in 2017, the Nickel Boys in 2020. Nickel Boys is based on a real Florida reform school where black boys were beaten and buried in unmarked graves as recently as the 1960s. This isn't history, the wound is still open. Some winners reveal something specific about craft. Cormac McCarthy's The Road is almost perversely spare, no quotation marks, minimal punctuation, long stretches of silence. It's Hemingway with the warmth surgically removed, deliberately devastating. But here's what I've come to believe. The books that truly stay with us longest usually aren't the ones that leave us hopeless. They're the ones that find light in the dark, even when they have to squint hard to see it. That's why Anthony Doerr's All the Light We Cannot See hits so differently than The Road. Same territory, war, destruction, humanity at its very worst. But Doerr gives us a blind French girl and an orphaned German boy, 2 children caught in the gears of history, and he finds something genuinely luminous in their parallel stories. His title says it all the light we cannot see. The beauty that persists even when we can't perceive it. That's the hardest kind of hope to write, and the most necessary. Then there's Lonesome Dove. Larry McMurtry set out deliberately to destroy the myth of the American West, to show cowboys as lonely, violent, morally compromised men living brutal, pointless lives. He succeeded completely. And then something miraculous happened. Readers fell in love anyway. Because McMurtry's characters are so fully realized, so achingly human in their flaws and their loyalties, that you simply cannot help yourself. Augustus McCree might be the greatest character in all of American fiction. The anti-Western became the definitive Western. There's a profound lesson buried in that about how literature actually works. You don't fall in love with perfect heroes. You fall in love with people who are deeply, recognizably flawed and fighting anyway. That's Steinbeck's Joad family in The Grapes of Wrath, economically destroyed, betrayed by their own country, exhausted, and still moving forward. And it's Demon Copperhead in Kingsolver's 2023 winner. A kid born into Appalachian poverty and the opioid crisis, knocked down over and over, and you cheer for him on every single page. When Kingsolver wrote Demon Copperhead, she was in explicit conversation with Dickens, specifically David Copperfield. Dickens wrote about Victorian England's institutional cruelty toward the poor. Kingsolver transplanted that exact same story, the orphaned boy, the exploitative systems, the rare figures who save him, into 21st century Appalachia. Same story, different century. Still happening. The Grapes of Wrath and Demon Copperhead are about different generations of Americans being failed by the same broken promises, separated by 80 years. Viet Thanh Nguyen's The Sympathizer might be the most subversive book on the entire Pulitzer list. It's narrated by a Vietnamese double agent confessing to his captors, a confession that keeps undermining itself, catching the narrator in his own contradictions. It's a novel about the impossibility of being purely on one side of anything, and it's genuinely uncomfortable for American readers because it refuses to frame the Vietnam War the way we were taught. Nguyen names the atrocities. He does not let you look away. Jeffrey Eugenides did something similarly radical with Middlesex, 500 dense pages about a Greek-American family and a protagonist born intersex. What sounds like a narrow premise actually becomes one of the most expansive explorations of Americanness ever written. It starts in a burning Greek village in 1922 and ends in Detroit in the 70s. And quietly, across all 500 pages, Eugenides makes his real argument. America has always been a place where people reinvent their identities, sometimes because they have no other choice. Here's something I bet you didn't know. John Kennedy Toole wrote A Confederacy of Dunces in 1963 and spent years trying to get it published. Every major publisher rejected it. He fell into depression and died by suicide in 1969 at 31 years old. His mother Thelma spent the next decade relentlessly shopping the manuscript to anyone who would read it. It finally came out in 1980, 11 years after his death, and won the Pulitzer the following year. New Orleans loved it so much they built a bronze statue of its protagonist right on Canal Street. Paul Harding's Tinkers, the 2010 winner that reads more like prose poetry than a traditional novel, was rejected by dozens of major publishers. A tiny literary press with a staff of essentially 3 people published it in a print run of 3,000 copies. 3,000. And then it won the Pulitzer Prize. The entire literary establishment had to award its top honor to a book it had completely overlooked. That's not an embarrassment for the prize. That's proof it still occasionally does exactly what it's supposed to do. Michael Chabon's Cavalier and Clay won in 2001, and it's built around something most readers don't realize. The golden age of comic books was almost entirely the creation of Jewish artists and writers, many of them first- and second-generation immigrants, who invented Superman, Batman, and Captain America. They were literally building American mythology from scratch, often under pseudonyms, while their families were being destroyed in Europe. Chabon puts a fictional Czech refugee at the center of that world and uses it to examine grief, artistic creation, and America's unsettling capacity for reinvention. So here's what I keep returning to after reading through all of these. The best Pulitzer winners share one quality. They don't just tell a story. They locate a specific American wound, slavery, poverty, war, grief, systemic failure, and they refuse to look away from it. But they also refuse to leave you with nothing to hold on to. Lonesome Dove demolishes a myth and gives you characters so real you mourn them. Beloved forces you into darkness and gives you language that feels almost holy. The books that haven't aged well, Gone with the Wind, and to a lesser degree Mockingbird, are the ones that couldn't quite bear the full weight of the truth they were reaching for. They pulled their punches. They offered comfort where discomfort was required. The Pulitzer, being a human institution, sometimes rewarded that comfort. But taken as a whole, the list is one of the most honest records we have of what American storytelling has been reaching for, and what it's been willing to admit about itself, across 100 years. If you are only going to read one book from the entire Pulitzer list, just one, read Lonesome Dove. Not because it's the easiest choice, because it's the most complete. It will break your heart, frustrate you, make you laugh out loud, and make you feel the particular loneliness of a life lived without enough love. And it will make you care so deeply about 2 old cowboys that you will mourn them like people you actually knew. That is what literature does at its absolute best. It makes the invented feel more true than the real. If this has you thinking about the Pulitzer list, and I genuinely hope it does, we have a deep dive on Beloved that goes places most Morrison analysis simply doesn't dare to go. We'll talk about why Morrison called it her most difficult book, what the ghost actually represents at the level of American collective memory, and why the final pages might contain the most precisely constructed ending in 20th century American fiction. That video is linked right here. See you there.